What if a government tried to design its own people, not just through laws or culture, but through biology itself, hand-picking who gets to be born and who doesn't? This isn't the plot of a dystopian science fiction novel. It was the terrifying, real-life ambition of Nazi Germany, a monstrous social engineering project with a single, chilling goal: to forge a so-called master race. How did this obsession begin? And how far were they willing to go to achieve it? The answers reveal one of history's darkest chapters. The centerpiece of this nightmarish vision was the Aryan, a term you've heard 1,000 times, almost always associated with tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed supermen. But here's the first shocking truth: the Aryan race doesn't exist. It never has. The term originally comes from ancient linguistics, referring to a group of people who spoke Indo-European languages thousands of years ago in Central Asia. It has absolutely nothing to do with genetics, hair color, or any modern European ethnicity. But in the fevered minds of 19th and early 20th century race theorists, this linguistic term was hijacked and twisted. Writers like Arthur de Gobineau spun tales of a superior, noble Aryan race that was the source of all great civilizations. They claimed this pure race was being diluted and corrupted by intermixing with inferior peoples. This was pure pseudoscience, but it was dangerously seductive. It provided a simple biological scapegoat for complex social and economic problems. At the same time, another idea was gaining traction across the Western world: eugenics. Coined by Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, eugenics was the idea of improving the human population through selective breeding. It sounds horrifying now, but in the early 1900s it was mainstream. The United States, Sweden, and Britain all had active eugenics movements. They promoted policies to encourage the fit to have more children and, chillingly, to prevent the unfit from reproducing at all. The Nazis didn't invent these ideas. They found them lying around, waiting. What they did was take these existing concepts of racial hierarchy and eugenics, pour in a lethal dose of their own anti-Semitism and militant nationalism, and weaponize them on an industrial scale. They called their new, radical version Rassenhygiene, or racial hygiene. For them, the German nation wasn't just a country. It was a biological organism, a body that needed to be cleansed of all diseases and impurities to achieve its ultimate destiny. To build their master race, the Nazis implemented a two-pronged strategy. First, they had to increase the number of racially valuable Germans. This was the so-called positive eugenics program. At its heart was an organization so secretive and mythologized that its name still sends shivers down the spine: the Lebensborn. Translated as the spring of life, the Lebensborn program was founded in 1935 by Heinrich Himmler, the chillingly methodical head of the SS. The popular myth is that these were state-run brothels where SS officers were paired with blonde women to breed perfect children. The reality was slightly different, but no less disturbing. Lebensborn's primary function was to run a network of high-quality maternity homes. These homes were designed to encourage unmarried women who fit the Nazi racial ideal to have their children in secret, away from the social stigma of illegitimacy. Who were these women? Many were the mistresses of SS officers, or young women who had become pregnant by soldiers. Before a woman could be admitted to a Lebensborn home, she and the child's father had to undergo a brutal process of racial examination. They had to prove their Aryan ancestry stretching back generations. SS doctors would measure their skulls, check their eye and hair color, and scrutinize their entire family medical history for any hint of genetic defects or Jewish heritage. If they passed, the woman would be given the best possible medical care. The children born in these homes were the future elite of the Thousand-Year Reich. They were often christened in bizarre, pagan-like SS naming ceremonies, with Himmler sometimes acting as a symbolic godfather. But Lebensborn was just one piece of the puzzle. The Nazi state launched a massive propaganda campaign to glorify motherhood and large families. They introduced the Ehrenkreuz der deutschen Mutter, the Cross of Honor of the German Mother. It came in 3 classes: bronze for 4 children, silver for 6, and gold for 8 or more. Women wearing the Gold Cross were to be saluted by Hitler Youth members. They were given special seats on public transport and priority service in shops. It was a national honor. The state offered marriage loans, family allowances, and tax breaks, all designed to incentivize desirable couples to reproduce. Nazi posters depicted rosy-cheeked, healthy families, the supposed bedrock of the nation. It was a carefully constructed vision of a fertile, racially pure utopia. But this bright, sunlit image was designed to distract from the terrifying darkness lurking just beneath the surface. For every child the Nazis celebrated, there was another they sought to erase. For every life they tried to create, there were thousands they were determined to prevent or destroy. This was the second prong of their strategy: negative eugenics, the systematic elimination of what they called Lebensborn Leben, life unworthy of life. The very first step was taken almost immediately after Hitler seized power. In July 1933, they passed the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring. This law mandated the forced sterilization of hundreds of thousands of German citizens. A network of hereditary health courts was established. These courts, composed of doctors and lawyers loyal to the Nazi Party, held brief sham trials. People could be reported by their own doctors, neighbors, or social workers. The list of hereditary conditions was terrifyingly broad and unscientific. It included schizophrenia, manic depression, epilepsy, Huntington's disease, hereditary blindness and deafness, and even severe alcoholism. In reality, it was a blank check to sterilize anyone deemed a burden on the state. Over 400,000 people were sterilized against their will, their ability to have children stolen from them by the state in the name of racial purity. But sterilization was not enough for the regime. As Germany geared up for war, the Nazis decided that these unproductive citizens were not just a genetic threat, but an economic one. They were, in the cold calculus of the Third Reich, useless eaters consuming resources needed for the war effort. This led to one of the most monstrous programs in history, a secret dress rehearsal for the Holocaust, Action T4. Named after the address of its headquarters at Tiergartenstrasse 4 in Berlin, Action T4 was the clandestine euthanasia program for the disabled. It began with children. From 1939, doctors and midwives were required to report all newborns with severe disabilities. These children were taken from their parents under false pretenses, sent to special clinics, and then murdered by lethal injection or deliberate starvation. Soon, the program expanded to include disabled adults. Patients were selected from asylums and psychiatric hospitals across Germany. They were transported to one of 6 killing centers. There, they were led into rooms disguised as shower facilities and gassed to death with pure carbon monoxide. The methods, the technology, the personnel, the deception of victims, the use of gas chambers disguised as showers. All of it was pioneered and perfected during Action T4. It was the training ground for the Holocaust. The very same SS men who operated the T4 gas chambers would later go on to build and run the death camps at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. The ideology that justified killing a disabled German child was the exact same ideology that would later justify the mass murder of millions of Jews, Roma, Poles, and others. It was the belief that the state had the right to decide who lives and who dies based on their perceived biological worth. The Nazi quest for good blood was not confined to the borders of Germany. As their armies stormed across Europe, Heinrich Himmler and his SS race theorists saw a vast, new resource to be exploited: children. In the occupied territories of the East, particularly Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, they launched a terrifying campaign of mass kidnapping. This program was called Hue Action, or Operation Hay. The logic was as simple as it was evil. The Nazis believed that many people in these Slavic nations, whom they otherwise considered subhuman, possessed traces of Aryan blood from ancient Germanic migrations. They couldn't allow this valuable blood to be wasted in the service of an enemy nation, or worse, be eliminated in the brutal occupation. So they decided to steal it back. SS race squads, including doctors and anthropologists, would sweep into villages, schools, and orphanages. They would line up the children and conduct crude, on-the-spot racial screenings. They were looking for the stereotypical Aryan traits: blonde hair, blue or light-colored eyes, fair skin, and specific facial structures. Children who were deemed racially valuable were ripped from their parents' arms. Sometimes they were taken with a false promise of a better education or health care. Other times it was at gunpoint. There was no negotiation. The terrified children, some as young as toddlers, were transported to special transit camps. There, they underwent more thorough examinations and a period of preliminary Germanization. Their names were changed to German ones. They were forbidden from speaking their native language. They were told their parents were dead or had abandoned them. They were taught to be loyal to Germany and to Adolf Hitler. Any child who resisted this indoctrination was beaten. Those who passed this brutal process were sent on to Lebensborn Homes or directly to loyal German families, often the families of SS officers who couldn't have children of their own. They were presented as German war orphans. Their new families were often told nothing of their true origins. Their birth certificates were forged, their pasts completely erased. For the children, it was a waking nightmare. They had lost their homes, their families, their language, and their very identities. And what of the children who failed the racial test? Their fate was sealed. They were deemed racially undesirable. Most were sent to concentration camps like Auschwitz to be used for forced labor or to be murdered. The numbers are staggering. It's estimated that the Nazis kidnapped as many as 200,000 Polish children alone. Across Europe, the total may have been as high as 400,000. It was a state-sponsored program of human trafficking on an unprecedented scale, a demographic war waged against the unborn and the very young, all in the fanatical pursuit of racial purity. Creating and stealing children was only the beginning. The Nazi state understood that to build a lasting master race, they had to capture the minds of the next generation. The entire German education system was remade into a vast machine for indoctrination. From the moment they entered a classroom, children were bombarded with Nazi ideology. Biology classes were renamed race science. Students were taught to measure their own skulls and classify themselves and their classmates according to Nazi racial charts. They learned that the Aryan was biologically superior and that Jews were a parasitic race. Math problems were framed in military or eugenic terms, like calculating the cost of caring for the mentally ill or the trajectory of artillery shells. History was rewritten to glorify Germany's past and present the Treaty of Versailles as a Jewish conspiracy. Every subject became a vehicle for propaganda, but education went far beyond the schoolhouse walls. The lives of young people were regimented by two powerful organizations, the Hitlerjugend for boys and the Bund Deutscher Mädel, or League of German Girls. Membership became virtually mandatory. The Hitler Youth was designed to create the future soldiers of the Reich. Boys were taken on grueling camping trips, taught to read maps, handle weapons, and endure hardship. The focus was on physical toughness, absolute obedience, and unwavering loyalty to the Führer. They were being prepared for a life of conquest and domination. The League of German Girls had a parallel purpose, to prepare girls for their role as mothers of the master race. Their activities centered on physical fitness, homemaking skills, and racial hygiene. They were taught that their highest duty was to marry a racially pure German man and produce as many healthy children as possible for the state. This comprehensive system of indoctrination was designed to create a new type of human being, one who thought, felt, and acted not as an individual, but as a component of the racial collective, entirely devoted to the will of the Führer. What was the ultimate goal of all this? It was a vision of terrifying ambition. The Nazis, particularly Himmler, planned for a future where a racially pure Germanic Herrenfolk, or master people, would number in the hundreds of millions. This super race would rule over a vast empire stretching to the Ural Mountains. The native Slavic populations would be systematically exterminated, enslaved, or pushed into Siberia. This genocidal plan, known as Generalplan Ost, was the ultimate expression of the master race ideology. The Lebensborn children, the stolen children, and the indoctrinated youth of Germany were meant to be the first generation of colonists and rulers in this brutal New World Order. It was a future built on slavery, mass murder, and the complete annihilation of entire cultures, all justified by a twisted, pseudoscientific fantasy. In 1945, the 1,000-year Reich collapsed in fire and ruin after just 12 years. The Master Race Project, built on a foundation of lies and violence, crumbled along with it. But the human consequences of this monstrous experiment would echo for decades. When Allied forces discovered the Lebensborn Homes, they found hundreds of healthy, well-cared-for children. But what was to become of them? In the post-war chaos, many of these children faced a lifetime of stigma. In places like Norway, where a large Lebensborn program had operated, children fathered by German soldiers were treated as outcasts, publicly shamed, and often abused. Many were falsely labeled as mentally deficient and locked away in institutions. Even in Germany, they struggled. They were the living symbols of a despised regime, often carrying the burden of their biological parents' crimes. Many spent their lives searching for their true identities, caught between a hidden past and a difficult present. The fate of the stolen children was even more tragic. After the war, Allied teams worked tirelessly to identify and repatriate them. But the task was nearly impossible. The Nazis had been meticulous in destroying records and forging new identities. Many children had been too young to remember their real names or their families. They no longer spoke their native language and had been fully integrated into German life. Some didn't want to leave the only families they had ever known. While thousands were successfully returned, it's estimated that over 80% of the kidnapped children were never found. They grew up in Germany, unaware of their true heritage, a lost generation swallowed by the Nazi machine. The Nazi program to create a master race stands as one of history's most terrifying warnings. It shows how easily science can be perverted into pseudoscience to justify unimaginable cruelty. It demonstrates how the obsession with creating a perfect population inevitably leads to the persecution and destruction of those deemed imperfect. It was a war not just against other nations, but against humanity's own diversity, a war against compassion, against individuality, and against truth itself. The dream of a master race ended in a nightmare, leaving behind a legacy of broken lives, lost identities, and a chilling reminder of where the dark path of racial supremacy ultimately leads.